Okay, so I'm going to break this fallacy lecture into two separate parts because it's a fairly long lecture. Kind of recommend you take notes on it as well because there's a fallacy quiz where you'll have 10 fallacies and you have to match uh, the name of the fallacy to the sentence that is the actual fallacy. All right, so there's a difference between analogies and fallacies, but analogies can be a fallacy. So analogy just is an argument of comparison. So with that, what you're assuming is there's enough similarities between the two items that, or two topics that you're comparing, and that this leads to other similarities or similarity, a main one. This isn't as strong an argument as an inductive or deductive, but it can be used. However, it tends to be used incorrectly, and that's where you get the term false analogy, is these two analogies don't really work well together. So when I showed you that video with John Oliver and the gun lobbyist, where he's comparing not having guns and not having swimming pools, that's not a really fair analogy. It's a false analogy. All right, so again, the points of comparison must be fundamental to both items. So things like the cat leash, that, if dogs have to be on a leash when you go to a park, then cats have to be as well. That doesn't really work. I mean, nobody got mauled to death by a cat, unless they were already dead and the cat was locked in the house with them. The dove analogy, I won't go into it. It's from an advertisement that was going on with Dove, and then there was an analogy between it and something else of another product. All right. The way that you counter an analogy argument is just point out fundamental differences. So again, going back to the cat and the dog leash, the difference between cats and dogs is pretty fundamental, and you can see that. All right, now for the rest of the fallacies, there are main causes for this. People are just ignorant. And by that I don't mean the way ignorant is normally used, not as an insult. It's just that they are do not have information about something, and so they're making statements based from this lack of information. Sometimes people's egos, they believe they can't be wrong. Our politicians tend to do that. Uh, when they were arguing for Obamacare, many politicians were saying, well, we have the best healthcare system in the world. Well, we don't. We do not. There are a number of countries that have better healthcare. We have the most expensive. That's where we're number one with healthcare. People's prejudices cause fallacies as well. They have these false ideas about something or some group of people, and that tends to be a problem. And then there's also just the need for answers. People don't like the unknown, and so they come up with answers for things that may not be true. All right, so you've got to watch circular reasoning. This is where you're supporting a claim with itself, so it just restates it. So in the movie Thank You for Smoking, if you get a chance to see that, all of it, uh, the little girl, when she makes her speech near the end of the movie, says, well, we need freedom because without freedom we couldn't be free. And so that's, and without being free, we don't have freedom. That's circular reasoning. You're using free as a argument for why you need freedom. So saying things like this, also stealing is wrong because it is illegal. Well, yeah, something's illegal. It's got to be wrong. All right, so be careful of those. All right, now errors in generalizing. This is saying something that doesn't look at the complexity of an issue. So saying all taxes are unfair. Well, if you don't have some taxes, you're not going to have air traffic controllers. I kind of want somebody telling my pilot when he can land and when he can't land. So you kind of need taxes. They're not all unfair. Uh, you also have hasty or faulty generalizations. So you're suffering from insufficient evidence or you're ignoring a relevant piece of evidence. So when things were going on in Burma, China and Russia stating that Burma's situation as an internal affair does not constitute a threat to international security. Well, people were leaving Burma at an incredible rate and causing problems for other countries in Asia, which then becomes an international security threat. So they're ignoring that fact. that all these people were leaving the country to escape the problems in Burma. Now you have what's called a forced hypothesis. This is where you've got relevant but insufficient evidence. So in science, there's a thing called Occam's razor, where the evidence that's been gathered can be explained by the simplest hypothesis, and that's normally the correct one. This works really well in uh, science. It doesn't tend to work really well in society with human beings. So this example here, school massacres occur because guns are readily available to students. That's the simplest hypothesis. But it does not, again, deal with the complexity of the issue. And there's a big reason why school massacres, there are many reasons why school massacres occur, and just the guns being available isn't it. All right, slippery slope. This one gets used a lot, so you need to be aware of this one in your day-to-day life. So a slippery slope argument is that if X is allowed to happen, Y and Z will naturally follow. And most people don't want Y and Z to follow. It's a negative outcome. So the most famous of these is the domino theory for the Vietnam War. So the argument for us fighting the Vietnam War, one of the main ones, was that if Vietnam becomes communist, then one by one, like dominoes, each country in Asia will fall to communism, and that will work its way across to Europe. Europe will fall, and eventually the entire world. Well, Vietnam became communist. Nobody else did, so it didn't work well. All right, so be careful of that. False dilemma. This also gets used an awful lot, especially by politicians, only allowing for two possible outcomes when there's more than likely more than two. So this argument was made either we rescind the small business tax or no new businesses are going to come to Michigan. Well, there's lots of ways to get new businesses to come to Michigan without rescinding the small business tax. All right. So be careful of that when you get this either or. Make sure that the solution isn't being limited to two items when there's more than one, more than. All right, so this is post hoc fallacy. This oversimplifies causation by mixing up the temporal, the time relationships. So we should vote a Democrat into the White House. Once Bush was elected, we went straight into a recession, which we did, but it had nothing to do with Bush's election. It had a dot-com bubble that burst. Same argument was made for when Obama was elected. The opposite. We should have voted for a Republican. Once Obama got in office, we went into a great recession. We were going into that anyway. We had a housing bubble. Obama had nothing to do with it. So watch that.